Welcome back to Rick's Scale Model Fix and a brand new kit review. This time we're going to be looking at AMK, or the Antara 148 scale Mi-17 hip. So as always, we'll do the box top tour, and we've got a couple of North Macedonian Air Force helicopters there in flight. Reasonable artwork, sets the mood for the build ahead. On the box sides, we've got some of the options included in the kit, which is depicted on the top of the box, which is North Macedonian Air Force. And on the other side, the option that I'm going to be building from this kit is a Czech Air Force example. So you've got multilingual spiel and warnings around the box, and your kit number for this one is 88010. So without further ado, let's lift the lid to see what we get inside. So lifting the lid, we're greeted by quite a packed box. So we've got some clear parts, rotor blades, a couple of sprues there containing some of the smaller items, weaponry, engine compartment, some internal details with the rotor head, and the main fuselage and internal sprue, small photo etch sheet, decals, and the instruction booklet. So as always with AMK kits, the paperwork is of top quality, and we've got the box artwork depicted and repeated on the front cover with the 3 marking options included in the kit. Turning the page, and we have a brief history of the Mi-17 or NATO code hip, and it's just explaining what it is and what it does. And then we have the 3 marking options included. So we've got 2 Czech Air Force machines, North Macedonian Air Force in overall white, and paints and colours used, and they look to be cross-referenced to Mr. Colour, but they do give the FS numbers next to them for your preferred brand. Turning the page, and we've got some lovely colour artwork there for the North Macedonian Air Force one, the Czech Air Force machine, and that's dated as 1991, and the triple colour scheme of another Czech Air Force one. It's not dated, but I believe this to be the more later one. It just says in 2002, and that's the preferred option. I quite like that Czech helicopter camouflage. Quite comprehensive. Page 7, we've got painting diagrams and decal placement for the rotor blades, tail rotor, pylons, cockpit, and the UB-32 rocket pods. Construction then starts on page 8, and construction of the internal load area and cockpit is featured around a single part, to which we add the bulkheads, which are quite well detailed. We've even got a glazed window, cabin cockpit door, some fold up seats, fire extinguisher, decals, painting guide there for the front, and the whole assembly being ready to have the crew seats in stage 2. Instrument panels etc. all added, and that builds up to look quite detailed for the front, which is going to be a blessing, because obviously you've got that big greenhouse canopy which is going to be able to see all this through the side windows and the front windscreen. AMK Antara have followed the usual practice of having the internal structure of a helicopter enclosed and encapsulated in the fuselage halves, and to this end stage 3 sees the left cargo space being added with the seat frames and crew seats. And on page 10, that's repeated for the right cargo space in stage 4 before the roof and sidewalls are all added. Windows being added before the fuselage halves are joined together. And then I'm not sure what AMK are trying to suggest at this point where it says duddy, but I'm assuming it means putty. So perhaps they're already aware of an ill-fitting seam under the tail boom there. On to stage 6, and we see some basic engine details being added to that single part upper nacelle that we saw. Page 11. Page 12 and stage 8 we see the engine and gearbox coming together, and other bits and pieces, grab handles etc. all being added before we start work on the left and right troop doors. Now on the hip these open sort of this fashion, which is depicted in stage 10, and they're quite nicely detailed inside. And then in stage 11 we've got the front windscreen going on. In stage 12 we've got it saying attaching the belly, fuselage and fuel tanks. So we've got fuel tanks, belly plate, other lumps and bumps, winch etc. all going on there. Stage 13 we've got a whole step dedicated to the antennas, and 14 sees the left and right landing gear coming together, before 15 sees your tail rotor coming on. Weapons pylons, if you wish to attach those, are in stage 16. There's those UB-32 rocket pods, there's 6 in total going onto the airframe, and that's shown in quite some detail. Windows and ladders all coming together, so you can have that door open, so it's maybe pay dividends to take your time on the interior there and do a good paint job. 19 sees the main rotor head. Hopefully that's strong enough to bear the weight of that massive set of rotor blades. Turning the page to conclude the build, and we've got some bits to remove first before we start adding the photo etch replacements. Final page, we've got parts map and decal sheet to conclude the booklet. The decal sheet on first glance looks to be well printed. The stencil data is legible. The markings don't sit too proud on the surface of the decal paper. We've got whole raft of decals for the instrument panels and stencil rocket pylons, and everything's included. Escape hatches etc. It does say it's designed by L Decal Studios, but it doesn't say who's printed it, and to be honest they just look quite ordinary. Also included in the kit is quite a thick photo etch sheet, and as we saw towards the end of that build, this is the base plates for some of the antennas and other things along the underside of that tail boom. Take in a look at the plastic parts, and the size of the helicopter is quite striking. We'll just put this on the cutting mat. Without the canopy glass you're looking at 37 centimetres, so quite a big model. But the first thing I notice on this sprue is there's some real bad pitting on the surface of the plastic. I don't know if the camera can pick that out for the viewers, but just in this area it's really pitted and quite rough in texture. I expected more of AMK. Kits of late that I've seen have been really well produced, and to be honest the whole surface of the model has got quite a texture to it, but nonetheless the detail is quite good, devoid of any real raised rivets down the rear end apart from a few raised panels, not really characteristic of any of the Russian helicopters. Perhaps would have benefited from some raised rivet detail there. I'm not familiar with the type, so can't vouch for certainty that that would be full of rivets. We've got the tail rotor there as well, which looks quite nicely moulded. And on the blind side, bearing in mind that you're going to have an insert for the fuselage content, there's nothing in there that would infringe the fit of those internal parts. And you've got that rather strange side fitting fuel tank there as well. Sprue B. So we've got this central internal floor, which is where everything's built up through the early stages of the build, and again straight away I can see some really bad pitting to the parts here, and that's quite rough, isn't it? It's got a texture more akin to sandpaper, and that's not repeated on the cargo bay floor or on any of the other parts. It just seems to be that flat surface on sprue A and B. These are the cargo doors, and they look to be quite nicely detailed inside. Nothing too major to notice other than that. So we've got the cockpit bulkheads, which all look good when painted. Rotor head, which again, unfortunately, is featuring some rather deep sink marks there These are all going to need to be filled and sanded. A bit more work there. Not what I expected from AMK, but we'll progress. It's time consuming and annoying, certainly on a modern kit, but it's not a deal breaker. This is Sprue D, and we've got that rather large rotor head. And that does look reasonably well detailed for the scale. Hopefully it's strong enough to carry the weight of that massive rotor diameter and those big rotor blades. We've got more internal bulkheads, and the instrument panel for the overhead section of the cockpit looks reasonably well detailed, as does some of the centre consoles and other internal structures and the radios and control panels, etc. Lots of little aerials, pitot tubes, etc. on there as well, and the struts for the landing gear all look to be quite nicely moulded, and there doesn't seem to be any repetition of that grainy surface detail as we saw on the other two sprues. So this is the central gearbox engine housing, and again there's some quite worrying mould issues here, certainly around this top section. I don't know how well the camera will pick those up, but it's along this ridge. Other than that, detail is acceptable. So yeah, I was a little bit disappointed with this one, AMK. I'm sure you could do better than this. The Tomcat, L29 and Magister have all been really nice. Not going to open these, it's just two sprues for the seat framework, engine intakes and the crew seats, which are devoid of any canvas affected detail and look rather plain, to be honest. Again, another set of sprues, and one thing that's become quite noticeable just through the plastic here is some really quite severe sink marks to those pylons, to the point where I'm not going to use those on the kit, which is a shame. I'm getting more and more disappointed with this release as this review goes on, but we'll try and remain focused. So if you've got this kit, please check your parts. Let me know in the comments below if your parts are affected. Is it just my kit, or is it a general manufacturing problem? There's 5 rotor blades included in the kit, and they're packaged individually. They've got the blade droop already moulded in, which is helpful, and the reasonable detail there on the blades themselves and the portion of the rotor head and mechanism, so it should look well once painted. One area AMK always seem to excel at is weaponry and slide moulding these, and these UB32 rocket pods are no exception, and they're probably equally as good as anything from the likes of Eddard in their brassing range, and the 6 included in the kit. And I always like the way that the AMK weapons sort of stack up on themselves in the sprues, in the bags. So with some creative painting, they're going to look really quite nice. As with all my reviews, I'm not going to remove the canopy parts from the bag just to protect them. They look to be well moulded, certainly probably better moulded than the kit parts, to be honest. And the framework is quite well raised, so should facilitate manual masking quite well. However, looking at the nose, it's probably going to wait for an Eddard etch set, masking set, just to speed up things with that one. So there we have the AMK Antara 1/48 scale Mi-17 hip, and I'm really disappointed with this one. I expected better things of AMK, certainly after their Tomcat, Delphin, Magister, Kafir. Seems to be a step backwards. Whether that's a rush to bring this to the market, as we know that there's other model manufacturers sort of alluding to the fact that they're going to be releasing kits of the same helicopter. Having said that, there's nothing that makes the kit unbuildable unless the fit is really poor, which we shall find out in due course. It's just extra time taken in clean up, sanding those fuselages, sides and that belly plate smooth to get a good paint finish. On a plus note, the imperfections on the belly plate are underneath the model, so maybe not be as noticeable as certainly the mould imperfections on that gearbox and engine housing. So like we said, slightly disappointed with this one, but it is a MI17 in 48 scale. It's quite a big model, should look quite impressive in that check camouflage scheme once completed. So until next time, everybody look after yourselves, stay well and take care.